Jerusalem in the 1st century AD was a city trapped between faith and oppression. To the casual observer, it was a holy place of quiet streets and daily rituals, yet beneath the surface, it seethed with tension. Roman banners flew over the temples, their standards gleaming in the sun, symbols of authority that reminded every Jew that their city, their faith, and their people were under foreign dominion. Soldiers marched through the markets, their sandals kicking up dust, their eyes assessing the crowds for dissent. Taxes were extracted with an almost theatrical cruelty, leaving families impoverished and resentful. Even in their homes, citizens could not escape the presence of Rome. Informers lurked in corners, whispers could betray neighbors, and a careless word could summon the centurion to your doorstep. And yet, life went on. Children played in courtyards, merchants sold olives and figs, and priests carried out their rituals with a veneer of normalcy. But all of it masked an unspoken truth. The city was tense, fragile, and waiting for a spark. No one could have predicted where that spark would come from or how it would change Jerusalem forever. By the streets and alleys of the city, the seeds of rebellion were quietly germinating. Families whispered in fear, plotting survival against an authority that brooked no challenge. The Roman garrison was vigilant, yet they could not see everything, nor could they anticipate the coming storm of resistance. Ordinary citizens were caught between two worlds, submission and the dangerous allure of revolt. It was in this climate of fear and humiliation that the Sakari, later feared across Judea, began to take shape. A group of zealots, young men and women united by religion and a burning hatred for the oppressor, trained in secret. Their ideology was simple yet uncompromising. No human ruler could command obedience over the children of God. Rome, for them, was not just a political adversary, it was sacrilege incarnate. And yet, the Roman authorities, proud and disciplined, had no understanding of the fire building in the hearts of these zealots. Every patrol, every inspection only heightened the tension, driving the oppressed closer to acts they would not regret, yet would seal their fate. The first acts of terror were minor but chilling. A tax collector disappeared one night from the marketplace. A soldier was found dead, stabbed in a crowded street. To the ordinary citizen, it was terrifying, a sign that no place was safe. To the Sakari, it was a signal that the time to act was now. The city teetered on the edge of chaos, shops remained open, prayers continued, but a deadly undercurrent ran through every street. And in that uncertainty, people began to ask themselves, who can they trust? Who watches the watchers? In the shadows, Menachem ben Yehuda began to consolidate his influence. Charismatic and unyielding, he offered a clear path for the restless and enraged, a channel for their hatred, a purpose for their anger. Followers came quietly, one by one, each bound to secrecy and devotion, each learning the deadly skills that would soon strike fear into the heart of Rome. They trained at night in abandoned courtyards, their daggers gleaming under the moon. Every movement was calculated, every plan was rehearsed. And every night Menachem reminded them, submission was betrayal. Sacrifice was sanctity, and violence, when delivered with precision, was justice. For the ordinary Jerusalemite, life continued in its fragile rhythms until the first public strike. A Roman soldier, arrogant and unaware, fell to a dagger as the crowd scattered in terror. It was not just murder, it was a message, a whisper of the chaos to come. The city would never be the same. By now, rumors spread faster than the guards could contain them. Who was responsible? Where would they strike next? The atmosphere became electric with fear, uncertainty, and morbid curiosity. And yet, no one could foresee the scale of the uprising that was about to grip the city. If the Romans believed that strict patrols and public punishments would maintain order, they were about to discover how dangerous a quiet city could become when desperation, faith, and ideology collided. Citizens looked to the walls of Jerusalem, sensing that something far more sinister than routine tax enforcement was emerging. And the question that haunted every whispered conversation in the markets and homes was simple, yet terrifying. Who would be next? Before we continue to see how the Sakari struck fear across Jerusalem, please click the subscribe button and like the video, because doing so helps more people discover these hidden chapters of history. The city of Jerusalem, already tense under Roman oversight, was about to experience a form of warfare that had never before existed in the ancient world. Violence began to erupt not on open battlefields, but in streets, marketplaces, and courtyards where citizens believed they were safe. Roman soldiers, once symbols of invincibility, fell in seemingly random attacks. Their discipline and numbers meant nothing when stealth, timing, and ideology were the true weapons. The first major strike shocked the city. A Roman tax collector, known for his cruelty, was stabbed in the heart of the marketplace, the crowd scattering in panic. Merchants abandoned their stalls, children clung to their mothers, and whispers of Sakari began to ripple through Jerusalem. Rumors grew into fear. The people realized that a force existed that was not only invisible, but omnipresent. But the Sakari were not merely assassins, they were a network. They blended seamlessly into daily life, speaking the same language, attending the same synagogues, and observing every movement of their targets. Each member was trained in secrecy, often for years, honing their skills in surveillance, evasion, and precision killing. The curved daggers they carried, known as sika, were more than tools, they were instruments of psychological warfare. Their use was deliberate, personal, and terrifying. The Romans, proud and confident in their superiority, could not comprehend this strategy. They saw bodies, crime scenes, and panic, but no enemy. Every attempt to infiltrate the network failed. Every guard post proved insufficient. And the citizens, caught between terror and admiration for the audacity of the attackers, whispered questions with trembling lips. Who could strike next, and why? As the Sakari escalated their operations, symbolic targets were chosen to maximize fear. Soldiers loyal to Rome were eliminated not because they were militarily significant, but because their deaths sent a clear message: obedience to Rome would be punished, and complicity would be remembered. Religious leaders accused of collaboration were silenced in public, their deaths both punishment and warning. Every assassination was choreographed, rehearsed, and executed with cold precision. Among the most feared tactics was the element of surprise. Streets that seemed mundane, quiet alleys, marketplaces, even temples became hunting grounds. The Sakari struck and vanished, leaving chaos behind but no trail. Roman investigations were thorough but ineffective. Informers were rare and unreliable, and the population was unwilling to betray the assassins. Every act deepened the legend of the Sakari, while simultaneously eroding the authority of Rome. But the stakes rose when Menachem ben Yehuda, the leader of the movement, began to expand operations. He understood that terror was more than a tool, it was a message. Every strike was designed not just to kill but to instill dread, to make even the bravest Roman pause before walking Jerusalem's streets. Menachem trained recruits to think like shadows, to anticipate the enemy, and to embrace sacrifice as sacred duty. A young recruit, barely 18, was tasked with following a Roman centurion for days, mapping his routines and learning the rhythm of his life. It was exhausting and terrifying, but for the Sakari, failure was not an option. The lessons were brutal. Hesitation could cost lives, mistakes could destroy the network, and the discipline of silence was paramount. Soon, the attacks became more brazen. Soldiers fell in broad daylight, right in front of crowds. Panic spread across the city like wildfire. Citizens no longer knew whether to flee, hide, or watch. Each day, the fear grew, and the population became complicit in the psychological battle. Conversations were hushed, eyes darted constantly, and a single dagger became a story whispered in every home. And yet, the Romans did not relent. They doubled their patrols, interrogated citizens, and implemented harsh punishments for any sign of resistance. But no matter how visible their power, they could not see the shadows that moved between streets and roofs. It became increasingly clear that Jerusalem was no longer a city under occupation in the traditional sense. It was a city at war with itself, a city where invisible hands struck terror, and a population forced to live under constant surveillance and paranoia. Menachem's strategy was relentless. Assassins were taught to study their targets obsessively, habits, weaknesses, fears, and routines. The objective was never random violence, it was calculated, precise, and symbolic. Each act reinforced the Sakari's ideology. Rome was fallible. Even omnipotent Rome, a few dedicated men and women could strike with impunity, sowing fear that no legion could erase. But the most dangerous part of this shadow war was its unpredictability. The Romans could anticipate formations, numbers, and movements, but they could never anticipate belief, fanaticism, or devotion. The Sakari's devotion to Menachem and their cause transformed them from mere rebels into something far more terrifying, humans willing to risk everything for a principle. Rumors of the assassins' audacity spread beyond Jerusalem, reaching other cities in Judea and instilling fear in Roman allies. The psychological impact of their actions was immense. Soldiers feared the quiet of the marketplace as much as the open battlefield. And for ordinary citizens, life became a constant exercise in vigilance, a balancing act between hope, despair, and survival. The network grew, and with it, the legend of the Sakari. Each assassination was carefully documented within the movement, both as training for future recruits and as inspiration for those yet to join. Menachem's vision was clear. Fear could challenge empire, and ideology could rival military might. Yet, despite their growing influence, the Sakari were aware of the danger looming over them. Rome's response would eventually escalate, and the city's patience was limited. The tension built toward a confrontation that no one could fully predict. The stage was set, and the first hints of an inevitable clash between ideology and imperial power began to emerge. The air in Jerusalem was electric. Citizens whispered questions without answers. Streets that were once familiar now seemed treacherous. And in the hearts of the oppressed, a dangerous hope took root, that a handful of zealots could indeed challenge the might of Rome. Soon, the shadow war would escalate into something far more dramatic and organized, a machinery of terror led by a man whose name would strike fear into allies and enemies alike. Amid the chaos gripping Jerusalem, one figure emerged as both architect and prophet of the Sakari's terror, Menachem ben Yehuda. He was not merely a zealot. He was a strategist, a man who fused religious fervor with military cunning, transforming small acts of violence into a coordinated campaign designed to shake an empire. Menachem's presence was magnetic, drawing the restless, the angry, and the devout into a network that would become legendary in both fear and infamy. Every recruit who approached him underwent rigorous scrutiny. Loyalty was tested with tasks that demanded secrecy, endurance, and moral courage. There was no room for doubt. Hesitation was a liability, and betrayal was punishable by death. Yet Menachem did not lead through fear alone. He inspired a vision, a city freed not through open war, but through precise, symbolic strikes that challenged Rome's authority at every turn. The training was brutal. Recruits spent nights moving through alleys unseen, learning the rhythm of the city, memorizing the routes of patrols, and practicing the silent, swift use of the curved dagger, the seeker. They rehearsed every detail of an assassination repeatedly until muscle and mind moved as one. Failure was unthinkable. Each strike required more than courage. It demanded psychological conditioning, the ability to suppress emotion and embrace the inevitability of death for the cause. As their training progressed, Menachem instilled a central principle: targets were never chosen at random. Every victim, from tax collector to collaborator, represented a symbol of oppression. Each death sent a message to the living: Rome could be struck anywhere, and the obedient were never truly safe. The act of violence became ritualized, ceremonial, and terrifyingly effective. It was during this time that Jerusalem began to notice the subtle escalation. Not only were Roman soldiers disappearing, but the attacks grew increasingly audacious. A centurion was struck during a religious procession in front of a gathering of citizens, sending shockwaves through the city. Panic and fascination spread hand in hand. People could not look away from the spectacle, yet fear made them tremble. Menachem's brilliance lay in the orchestration of terror. Every mission was preceded by intelligence gathering. Patterns of movement, vulnerabilities, and potential witnesses were meticulously recorded. The assassins became ghosts, blending into crowds, vanishing when needed, and leaving chaos as their signature. Psychological warfare became as important as the act itself, for the message of invincibility, secrecy, and inevitability terrified Rome more than mere casualties ever could. And yet, Menachem was acutely aware of the limits of his organization. Rome was relentless, its legions disciplined, and its response merciless. The Sakari could not withstand direct confrontation. Their victories were in the shadows, their power in the perception of threat. They had to remain invisible, unpredictable, and untouchable, and every recruit had to internalize that reality. The Sakari also began to implement layers of hierarchy and operational discipline. Small cells acted independently, reducing the risk of exposure, while Menachem retained centralized oversight for strategy and recruitment. Communication was coded and discreet. Betrayal within the network was unthinkable. Every member understood that failure meant not just personal death, but the unraveling of the entire organization. One night, a young recruit misjudged a patrol route. The error could have exposed the network. Menachem's response was calculated, measured, and terrifying. The recruit was reminded that fear was a tool, and discipline was survival. Only through obedience and unwavering faith could they continue their mission. The lesson reverberated throughout the cells. Survival demanded mastery over oneself, and devotion to the cause surpassed all personal desire. By this time, the Sakari were no longer simply a terror group. They were a symbol of ideological defiance. Their reputation spread through whispers and rumors, creating an almost mythic fear of a force that could strike anywhere, at any time. Roman officers, previously unchallenged, began to walk with caution, eyes scanning shadows for what might never appear. The ordinary citizen, meanwhile, learned to live in constant tension, unsure who might be friend or assassin. The coordination and discipline of the Sakari allowed them to escalate their psychological campaign. Not only were attacks meticulously timed, but they were increasingly public. Roman collaborators, whether wealthy merchants or minor officials, were punished in front of witnesses. Every death was a spectacle, a reminder that resistance was possible, and submission came at a price. Yet for all their success, Menachem and his followers were aware of the narrowing window of opportunity. Rome's patience was not infinite, and an empire did not tolerate prolonged defiance indefinitely. Every assassination brought both strategic gain and new danger. The Sakari were playing a high-stakes game, where a single mistake could unravel everything they had built. It was within this pressure cooker environment that Menachem's vision became most daring. He began planning strikes that were not only symbolic but audacious, designed to demonstrate the impossibility of Roman control. The city itself became their stage, each act of violence a performance of power, precision, and ideological defiance. Citizens watched with a mix of awe and terror. Markets were no longer safe. Streets were arenas of possibility. Every passerby could be the next target. Every shadow could conceal an assassin. Yet, the same terror inspired admiration for the audacity of those who dared to challenge the greatest empire the world had ever known. The stage was set for an escalation that would force both the occupiers and the oppressed to confront the ultimate question: how far will men and women go when belief, faith, and fanaticism become indistinguishable from strategy? Before we dive into the final segment, don't forget to click the subscribe button and like the video. It helps ensure that more people can witness this untold chapter of history, hidden in shadows and blood. The city of Jerusalem had reached a breaking point. Months of terror orchestrated by the Sakari had transformed every street into a battleground of fear and anticipation. Roman soldiers, once confident and disciplined, now moved with hesitation, their armor gleaming under the sun, yet their eyes scanning every shadow. Every corner, every alley, every marketplace held the possibility of sudden death. The city itself seemed to breathe tension. For Menachem ben Yehuda, this was the moment toward which every training, every mission, every ritualized act of violence had been leading. He knew that the small, clandestine network could never defeat Rome in open battle. Their strength was in belief in the terror they inspired and in the precision of their strikes. Yet he also understood that the empire's patience had limits. A confrontation was inevitable, and it would test both their faith and their skill to the extreme. The first clash came when a patrol of Roman soldiers intercepted a Sakari cell near the eastern gate of Jerusalem. The encounter was brief but brutal. Daggers flashed, men fell, and screams echoed across the streets. Ordinary citizens watched in horror and awe, realizing that the shadow war had erupted into direct confrontation. But even as blood stained the cobblestones, Menachem remained focused. This was not defeat, this was demonstration. The Sakari had struck and the message had been delivered. Rome was not untouchable. The response from the Roman authorities was swift and unrelenting. Legions encircled neighborhoods, interrogations intensified, and public executions were carried out to reassert control. Yet the psychological damage had been done. Fear and uncertainty had seeped into the hearts of both soldiers and civilians. The empire realized, perhaps too late, that ideology and terror could challenge its authority in ways it could neither predict nor fully suppress. Amid this chaos, Menachem orchestrated the most ambitious strikes yet. High-ranking collaborators were eliminated with precision that stunned even the most seasoned Roman commanders. Every move was choreographed to maximize fear and minimize exposure, creating an impression of omnipresence. It was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare centuries before the term existed, and yet with every victory came the shadow of consequence. The Romans, enraged by the audacity of the attacks, tightened their grip on the city. Curfews were imposed, homes were searched, and families of suspected Sakari members were threatened. The stakes had never been higher, and the network faced constant danger of exposure. The city teetered between rebellion and repression, and the line between survival and martyrdom blurred. One night, Menachem convened his closest operatives. Candles flickered in the dim room, casting long shadows on faces set with determination. He outlined the next series of strikes, bold, public, and highly symbolic. Each member understood that this could be their final mission, yet the devotion was unwavering. The belief that they were agents of divine will made fear irrelevant. Every dagger, every shadow, every calculated strike became a message. Jerusalem would not bow. Meanwhile, the Romans realized that brute force alone could not restore control. Intelligence reports, spies, and informers failed to uncover the full network. Frustration mounted in the legions. Soldiers began to fear the quiet corners of streets as much as the loud clash of battle. And for the citizens, daily life became a tense negotiation between obedience and survival. Every step outside the home carried risk, yet the city pulsed with the unstoppable energy of resistance. As the months passed, the inevitability of total confrontation loomed larger. Menachem and his followers understood that their campaign had provoked a response that could destroy them entirely. Yet surrender was not an option. For the Sakari, belief was inseparable from action. Faith demanded risk, and devotion required sacrifice. Every mission was a testament to their cause, a psychological weapon aimed at the very heart of Roman authority. Then came the final, fateful stand. The Romans, determined to crush resistance once and for all, moved to encircle the Sakari in one of the city's labyrinthine districts. Every exit was blocked, every alleyway guarded, yet the assassins moved with the skill, discipline, and courage honed over months of training. The confrontation was fierce, close quarters, and merciless. Blood mixed with sweat on the cobblestones, and screams echoed through the city that had learned both fear and awe in equal measure. In the end, the Sakari could not defeat the empire in open combat. Their numbers were too few, their weapons too light, and their mission never designed for conventional victory, yet their impact was undeniable. They had demonstrated that belief, organization, and terror could challenge even the most disciplined and powerful army. They had turned fear into a weapon, and in doing so, carved their story into the memory of Jerusalem and history itself. The city would never be the same. Roman authority was reasserted, but the legacy of the Sakari endured. Stories of their audacity, their discipline, and their fanaticism spread through Judea, shaping the way people thought about resistance, faith, and the price of defiance. Jerusalem had witnessed a conflict unlike any other, a war not defined by territory or conventional strategy, but by ideology, terror, and the human capacity for both devotion and violence. Menachem ben Yehuda and the Sakari faded from immediate history, yet their story lived on in whispers, legends, and the lessons it left behind. They had shown the world that even a handful of determined individuals, armed with belief and discipline, could challenge an empire. And they left an enduring question for all who would follow: how far will devotion drive men and women when all else fails and the only weapon left is faith itself? As the dust settled, Jerusalem continued its daily rhythms. Markets reopened, children played, and priests resumed ceremonies. But beneath the apparent calm, the memory of those months of terror lingered, shaping every glance, every step, and every whispered word. The shadow war had ended, but its echoes persisted, reminding all who lived through it that belief can be as powerful as any legion and terror as potent as any army.